Welcome to Popcorn Psychology, the podcast where we watch blockbuster movies and psychoanalyze them. My name is Brittany Brownfield, and I'm a child therapist, and I'm joined by...
Ben Stover, individual therapist.
Hannah Espinoza, marriage and family therapist.
We are all licensed clinical professional counselors, also known as therapists, who practice out of Chicago. Even though we are licensed mental health professionals, this podcast is purely for entertainment purposes and to fulfill our love of dissecting pop culture in all forms.
Please remember that even though we are all licensed therapists, we aren't your therapist.
If you are struggling with mental health symptoms, please find a local mental health provider.
We are still in our spooky season, and so we decided to do Practical Magic. I'm so excited to talk about it. And so Practical Magic is a story about it's kind of a generational story about a family of women who are witches, and their husbands always die, and it's sad. And...
You are doing great.
Such a bad job of doing the intro. Oh my god, I'm so embarrassed.
You've got the first 3 minutes down.
Okay, cool. So,
Some other stuff happens in the movie.
Am I still just going?
Yes, you're still going.
Okay, cool.
And I'm going to leave all of this on here because it's
Please don't do
just
that.
so good.
Please don't. So it's about these two sisters, and you just see them throughout their life and how being a witch and traumatized has been hard for them or whatever.
This is the worst. This is the worst.
Oh god, I'm so sorry that I cannot get my shit together enough to talk about this properly.
I think
This
people are
is one
going to
of
enjoy
Hannah's-
the authenticness.
This is one of Hannah's favorite movies, y'all.
It really is, and I feel like I'm describing it very poorly.
And when we make Hannah open up the episode, it is her least favorite thing.
I hate everything about it. Literally.
You're doing a good job. Keep going.
Okay, so we're going to talk about
So what we're going to talk about today is that this is a growth mindset oriented podcast, and because of that, we are encouraging Hannah to grow through her strengths and grow through her difficulties and face the things that make her nervous and doubt herself, even though she is a wonderful podcaster and great clinician full of lots of skills, and we believe in her ability to get through this 100% and are offering support.
Yes. Thank you. But
Please tweet your support
I
at Hannah.
want to stab you right now. So we're going to talk about generational trauma and attachment and acceptance and identity in this episode. So first, we're going to talk a little bit about generational trauma.
Yes, which you see a lot of in this movie. This movie opens up with kind of the founder of this family, a woman who they attempted to hang her. Like she was attempted like homicide by our community via hanging for being a witch. She is pregnant. She goes by herself to an island and raises herself up. And they, in the very beginning of the movie, they say like she put a spell on herself, basically that no one would ever harm her. No woman would ever be harmed by a man like through their whole family, but because she became so bitter, it became a curse. So then so the whole like bloodline of this family, basically generation through generation, is whenever we love somebody, we lose them, with the exception of your family. Which causes, obviously, and so how it presents in this movie is in the present day, we're with Sally and Jillian, who are sisters, and we kind of see like the impact of that trauma, both through that, like all the deaths through the generations through this, but also like the generational trauma of how ostracized they are within their community. Like there's so much bullying and like loneliness within this family because they are considered like a capital O other within like the community of their town.
I think that's a fantastic job of summarizing this film.
Thank you.
And when
1,000 points to Ravenclaw.
and -5 from Slytherin.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. I feel like it's probably more like 50 points, and that's also
5
fine.
points from Slytherin.
But
Yes.
this movie does a great job of taking us through their story and through their challenges that they face because of the generational trauma, and also the struggles they have to go with in accepting themselves, accepting their roles in each other, accepting how they now fit into their family as adults, and one of the things that we really see also is how their aunts who have become their caretakers really start to force them into a situation where they have to clean up their own mess. Mm-hmm. And the aunts take a step back and force them into adulthood, really.
Yeah, so there's a lot of so I think this movie does a good job in terms of the generational trauma of showing how, the narrative of it, there's very much right away in the scenes where Sally and Jilly are little girls, how the aunts continue this narrative of everyone we love dies, this kind of the cloud that's over their family, which I think is a really real thing. There's obviously a lot of literal magic and magical realism in this movie, but I think the way that this family deals with the generational trauma and how it's affected them is very real. I think a lot of people see that in real family structures of the story we tell ourselves about our family and what our families have gone through and how it shapes our identity nowadays and how it informs how we see ourselves and how we are within the world. And I think what's really interesting in this movie is that you see two very different ways that can manifest in an adult, in a kid and in an adult. So when we talk about attachment styles in therapy, it sounds like how it is, which is how do we attach to other people?
Before you talk about attachment, just really quick. So, Jillian and
Sally.
Jesus. Jillian and Sally's mom,
yes,
completed suicide. So that's how they end up as little girls living with the aunts. Sorry, I just in case. Go ahead.
No, and that's a very good point to bring up because we're talking about two characters who their father dies, then their mother dies via suicide, and then they're orphans and they go to live with their aunts who are much older than them. So being raised by it feels rude to say they're elderly. They're not elderly. They're in their 50s or 60s.
I feel like a grandma, like a grandparent age.
Being raised by someone who's over a generation older than you.
Yeah.
And so we see them. So with attachment styles, just very briefly, attachment is how it sounds. Like I said, it's how do you attach to the world and how do you present yourself within relationships. And so there's two main. Attachment theory is a whole thing. We're not going to get into it. You can do research on it if you want.
Right, there's a lot. It's a lot.
But the two ways we're going to talk about it here are inhibited and disinhibited. And these are two terms that are thought of a lot in the work I do as a child therapist. There is a diagnosis within children called reactive attachment disorder, RAD for short. And they're two in the olden days with DSM-4, there were two specifications. Either you are inhibited or disinhibited. And now there's two different diagnoses in the DSM-5 where you're either reactive attachment or you're disinhibited something. That's even as a therapist, you don't have everything on the top of your head. So, but basically inhibited is how Sally presents in this movie. It's when you're very, you're more guarded, you're harder to warm up, it's very hard for you to be vulnerable. You can almost also, you go the other end of it where you can be intentionally hard to know. You can be almost off-putting is where it can really present itself in more maladaptive ways. Just very protected, very guarded, very not interested in forming relationships because there's a negative connotation to it. And disinhibited is the other end of the spectrum, which is more how Jillian presents in the movie, which is you're a lot more impulsive. You get attached really easily to other people, really attached really quickly. The way I would see it in little kids sometimes is they would tell me they loved me the second time I met them and be very attached to me, even though I was a therapist who saw them sometimes. You know what I mean? And then you can also be, like I said, really impulsive. You can do a lot of, you have a very hard time doing proper risk assessment, which is this is a bad idea. You're very provocative. You just your decision making isn't great when you're more the disinhibited type. And so I think what I appreciate about this movie and why we want to talk about this today is that Sally and Jillian are practically twins. they don't really say who's older than the other, but they seem like the same age pretty much.
Yeah.
And they're two girls who were raised in the same household with the same circumstances, the same trauma, and yet present really differently in how that they have developed. Even as little girls, there's a scene in the movie where they watch their aunts do that love spell for that woman. And Sally responds by saying, I hope I never fall in love. I hope I never fall in love. Like, you can see those walls forming up if they haven't already. And Jillian responds with, I can't wait till I fall in love. So it's like being very pulled towards the kind of like more chaotic energy that comes with like being disinhibited.
And also I feel like the other thing to point out is that they're also very close to each other.
Yes.
So it's also interesting that even though they're very close and connected to each other, they are so like almost exact opposites in terms of this.
Which we see continue to manifest through their relationships up until the point where we see Jilly leaving with a boyfriend because she's in love, and we see her take off at it appears to be a young age.
Yeah.
Where she sneaks off into the night out the window.
Yeah.
And they make a blood pact with each other before they go, but we see her just use this chaotic energy where the other ones, what's the other character? Sally, thank you. I wanted to call her Sandra, and they're like, that's not right. That's the actress. But as you see, like, the ants have to cast a spell on her, which we don't find out till a little later, that they casted a spell on her so that she goes after the apple salesman that ends up being her husband and the father of her children. They had to cast the love spell on her in order to get her to go and be with this guy that she was obviously interested in on the street, and did like kind of a double take on who's that?
Yeah.
And we see like this continue to manifest as it plays throughout their life, as one is more cautious, one is very measured and proper and maintains things and kind of goes about her business and takes care of her needs and things she's supposed to do, and the other one goes out and does whatever she feels like doing.
Yeah. And so, yeah, it's a good case of how these circumstances can create two very different people, and both of those both those presentations make sense. And it's not unrealistic for two sisters who are this, like you're saying, Hannah, this close, and have so much in common to be this wildly different, because kind of the point of when you have developed an attachment style that's influenced by trauma and heartbreak and tragedy is basically the common thread of both of these presentations is that they're on a far end of the spectrum. Like, you're either hella closed up or you're wide ass open. And both of these presentations, there is no nuance. There's no like, I'm gonna like make decisions and make interpretations as I go along. It's just like I'm an extreme in one sense or the other, because I've grown up in an environment in which I was just so hurt. Yeah.
And just being very rigid.
Yes.
Very rigid, really inflexible. And that even, so like when you think about people who experience trauma and they can learn and they can grow and they can change, and it's almost like this part of them is just trapped in the pain and the heartache that they experienced as children.
Mm-hmm. And I would say too, like, both these presentations kind of have the illusion of control. Like with Sally, you know, being so protective and so guarded, it's because I'm sure she feels like I'm controlling the situation. Like so much of my life experience, like my dad dying, then my mom dying, and then me living with my aunts, and like all the people in the town being dicks, like that's all been out of my control. And so I'm going to do this stuff to make, like, at least I can protect my heart and keep anyone else from hurting me if I don't open up. And I think Jillian is, even though she seems more out of control, there's also the same illusion of control there. Yeah. If I'm provocative first, then I'm controlling the narrative. Like when she goes to the PTA meeting and she's like, "Ooh, right. hang on to your husband's girls, I'm back." Like her making a scene in that PTA meeting is her taking control of the narrative. It's basically like if I make fun of myself first, then I'm protecting myself from other people making fun of me.
Well, and also you see in her general behavior too, like first introduction to her as an adult is her like being in Miami, like surrounded by like 3 dudes who are obviously scuzzy.
Yeah, sleazies for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And the the thing that we see about her is that she tries to control the situation by controlling every one of her whims, but never really letting anyone else into her true emotional state, and like in kind of engaging through her id, basically.
Yeah.
And like if I engage in like my every want and will, then I never have to let you into the real me or my real desires, because I can keep you kind of at an arm's distance and be an object of my pleasure, as opposed to like someone I'm really letting into a partnership of my life. And it's another kind of presentation you see with that is control through chaos, but I control the chaos.
Yes. The way I kind of think of it, because when I've worked with this sort of presentation, it's been with little kids. And so typically what I'll hear from parents is, why is this kid being such like a chaotic mess? Why can't they just like follow the rules or not get in trouble because it'll make everyone's life easier? Like it does go against common sense. Like, and so what I try to tell parents is it's based in the, like you're saying, like Ben, is like controlled chaos, where it takes trust to build something up, and like other people, and it takes only yourself to destroy something. So why like when I talk to these parents, your child is engaging in destructive behaviors, and why like maybe Jilly is also like involving themselves in destructive behaviors, is because they can control that. Like they're bringing it down. And so, and also I think it's the whole thing of like, I'm going to destroy it before someone else destroys it for me.
Correct. It's the same thing we see in the cycle of abuse, where when people who are in an abusive relationship start to see the tension building in the cycle and they feel it building, and then what they start doing is, instead of waiting, because for them waiting for the inevitable abuse is worse, they start agitating the abuser, so that whatever happens just gets over with, so they can get back to the part where they don't have to worry about it for a while.
Yep.
And you can see that in, not that neither of these girls have rad. Like, neither of these characters have rad.
Yeah, that's a good distinction to
make.
But,
like, going to start right there, like, because we've talked about that, like, it's kind of like a diagnostic thing, but as a clarification, neither of them have this. Neither of them have any of the signs of this, but they do show this attachment style, which attachment theory exists in many different forms, and there's many different words for essentially the same ideas.
Yeah.
And we're offering just one look at it, because there's several more classifications, because attachment theory has been around almost as long as psychology itself.
Yes.
So to go through that whole discussion would be
that whole podcast,
the whole course. It would be a whole graduate school course.
It would be a whole podcast in and of itself, like a whole series of podcasts.
I mean, I think I took a whole class about attachment in terms of couples.
Right.
Like, yeah, absolutely.
It's a whole class. So that what we are aware acutely that we are offering a limited view into this, but to kind of highlight what we're seeing. But the thing that we go through with these situations is people are always trying to control the chaos in whatever way makes the most sense to them and the way they understand the world. And we see these two women are going about it in very different ways. One is very measured and controlled and keeps you, like, lets everyone in, but only lets everyone into the version of herself that she wants people to see. Because notice she never accepts that she's a witch. She never accepts that. She only presents the acceptable version and lets you into that.
Yes.
Whereas the other one lets you only see the version that is chaotic. She doesn't let you see the soft side underneath that.
Yeah.
The part that is connected to her sister, the part that loves her sister, the part that would immediately drop everything and go across the country for her sister when her sister needs her.
Yes.
And doesn't let you see that at all. And the only person that really sees that is the family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I bet you the only person that sees like that tender part of Jillian is probably only Sally, because not even the aunts. Like, there's still even like a disconnect between her and the aunts. Like, she doesn't let them know when she comes to visit Sally after Sally's husband died. Like, she very clearly is seeing the aunts for the first time since she was probably like 17 or 18 when she left the house.
Yep.
Like, after Sally brings her home.
And I feel like even her like anxiousness about meeting her nieces, and then her really leaning into it because the girls are so excited to meet her.
Yeah.
And you can see like she really like drops her guard as soon as she realized that they are just like ecstatic to meet her.
Yes. And I think kind of going back to what you were saying too, Ben, about how when she's at that party, it's all guys around her. Another like common trait of like more disinhibited attachment is hypersexuality. Like also kids that I would work with that have this more disinhibited would be a lot more provocative sexually at much younger ages, and not necessarily like sexual in the way that adults are sexual. They might be like really affectionate, like wanting to sit in your lap, wanting to hug you, and they barely know you, just like they've never met a stranger kind of thing. And I think with her, how it's presenting more with Jillian though, and the hypersexuality is like, I wonder if she has any female friends. I bet you she only hangs around guys, because there's also control in that. Like I'm in control of the sexual dynamic of this relationship because I only hang out with guys who want to fuck me. And that's it, and it's a protective thing.
Yeah, well, and
you
she
can't get rejected if they want to do it.
Exactly. And also, she knows what the outcome will be, right? She doesn't know what the outcome will be if she's in a female friendship where them being sexually attracted to her isn't a part of the story. She doesn't know what will happen. Therefore, she creates, again, she creates this narrative with which that's the rigidness of this.
And also the power dynamic of that.
Yes.
Like if a guy wants to fuck me, like I know what to do with that. Like I feel power in that because like I have something they want, which is like we've been talking about, but that's not vulnerable. Like in that situation, she's being a role with them. She's being like a sexual being with them. She's not being vulnerable in a way where they can hurt her. And even with like when she starts dating Jimmy, like the way she talks about the relationship is like such like a blanket of red flags sewn together.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, and even the fact that she admits to her sister that she has to like put him to sleep using belladonna in order to like get away from him for a little bit. And the fact that feels so normalized for her. Like, I feel like that's something that she's maybe done with other partners, because it's just like another part of I should only have to deal with them until I can't. And then I need to take care of myself.
Or just wanting to be with someone who's that obsessed with you. Like, enjoying that dynamic of like the enmeshment of it, of like I like being with someone who is so up my ass, like which what Sally says, like that I have to poison him once a day so that I can literally sleep. But also and liking that, which is the red flag of it. Of like I'm attracted to that because he's so enamored with me that I'm in control.
And I think that also very much, again, that sense of not being able to mitigate risk.
Yes.
Right? Is that she really does believe that she's in control of the relationship. And she definitely is not. Like when he just hits her and the way that she seems so genuinely surprised when she tells her sister the story about what happened at the store. She's like, we were standing there, we were talking about something, and I told him no, and then he hit me. Like, he just hit me at the store. Like, you can tell that she's so surprised, when really, I would imagine that he has been violent towards her in other ways, clearly.
Right. Well, we find out that he is a serial killer.
Yeah, exactly.
Which does not surprise me at all.
Yeah,
after getting to know him, like the level of chaos and emotional intensity, and like using her for whatever his needs are, and not having an ounce of concern for hers, is a really good clue that this person might be a serial killer.
Well, yeah, and it's the thing too, like we've been like the mitigating risk, like you were saying, Hannah, of like she thinks she knows what she's talking about, and she thinks she's assessing risk, I think. And I think she doesn't realize, because she's in it, that she has such a bad barometer for it.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure, like, Sally, I mean, she was only indirectly telling Sally a story, and Sally was already clocking it. And Sally and Jilly, I'm sure there were, like you were saying, Ben, it was probably a mile-long walk to him hitting her in the face. And she didn't see any of the milestones along the way that would have indicated to her, this will go badly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, her thinking she can keep this like crazy, possessive, chaotic energy of his, that she thinks she can keep it in a place.
Yeah.
And not realizing till it's too late that he is dangerous. Like truly dangerous.
Yes, absolutely.
As evidenced by when he tries to kill her in the car.
Yeah.
Yeah, or even just when he pops her in the face when she calls Sally. Like you were saying, like she seems surprised it went that far. And I think like
And I would imagine that he has threatened her many times before he actually hit her.
Oh, I bet you he's definitely a guy who punches the wall next to your head.
Yeah, and like
but not
hostile. Yeah, absolutely.
Or throws things during fights. I bet you they have fights that are just like bananas.
He is all of those things, but he, like you see from his thing, he is a person who has no regard for human life because,
yes,
you know, we only see a little bit of him before he's dead, but
and then a ghost, so you know.
And then a ghost. You know.
We don't know any ghost psychology, unfortunately. We don't know how
I can't not
how
see him
being
as
a ghost affects you.
The doctor from ER is like, I just can't. And then like I'm thinking, like as of seeing his presentation and his hair in this movie, like God, this is so 90s. But
he is so hot in this movie. Ben, just say it. Just
love
say
it.
I feel
Love to
like
see it.
he is like a poor like substitution for John Stamos in this movie.
That is the rude. That is such a
disgusting thing.
Correct statement.
John Stamos.
Yeah, see, and now watch. I just
Nobody's
antagonized both of you.
Thinking
like,
about John
simultaneously.
Stamos.
Ew,
like
I have
ever.
never-
Everybody in the 90s was thinking about John Stamos.
No.
I have never thought about John Stamos.
Never.
You guys are so easy.
Disgusting. I thought you were going to say low rent Johnny Depp, which I would have hated also, but understood.
Yes.
No,
But if I
just,
would've
just
understood,
that everybody everywhere had that haircut. That's
Maybe
all. Like
you
it's just so 90s. Like,
Maybe you were thinking about John Stamos.
Yeah, because I don't know how to help you with that.
Yeah. I mean, if you give me some oikos, we'll be in like good state. But anyway, I just like antagonizing. I don't actually think he's a poor substitute for John Stamos.
Okay, good.
Obviously, he was the right actor for this role. But
Thank you for the clarification.
For anybody who listens to that, that's just me antagonizing them. Because, see, it worked.
Attacks from all sides.
Yeah, but it worked. And now I'm going to get attacked on Twitter, which is fine. But anyway, we see about him, what we know about him is he has a callous disregard for human life. And it's pretty likely that he would think the same about hitting the wall as he would her face.
Absolutely.
That's also true.
Yeah.
And that
good point.
I don't know that he would bother hitting the wall.
That's a good point. Because he like from jump, I mean, he's clearly like going through, like, I wonder too, like, it does seem, I know he's drunk when he's with Sally and Jillian in the car, but it does seem like he's definitely ratcheted up in energy. And if he's a serial killer, like we know, there is that sort of thing where like the desire to cause chaos like ramps up until you complete your act of killing and then you can calm down. Like it's the same kind of cycle as we talk about with abuse. But yeah, you're right. Like the way he acts towards Sally in the car, who he's just met.
Well, he just chokes the sister in front of her.
Yeah,
like he grabs her in the car and pulls her behind. Just grabs her by her neck.
He tries to brand her first with the ring.
Right. These are not things that people who are sane do.
Well, even him, wanting to brand her literally like cattle, and because he wants to mark her as his,
because she's a thing.
Yeah, because she's a thing.
Because he's a serial killer.
And
serial killer.
Oof. And I think what's also the shame about Jillian as well is that when you are internally very chaotic, you also can attribute like that. This is what love looks like. Mm-hmm. Like if someone's not this passionate about you and this enmeshed with you, then do they really love you?
Right.
And that's where it can get really hard to differentiate like red flags and have intuition about like the proper like boundaries within a relationship. And if something's going to go very badly is if you do like associate chaos and like, I don't like saying, I shouldn't say passion. It's how it's labeled a lot, but it's not really passion. It's usually it's a lot of chaotic feelings inappropriately displayed.
Yeah.
That we have rebranded as passion because we live in a misogynistic patriarchy.
No doubt. That is exactly why.
I didn't think I'd go there with that sentence, but I did. But yeah, I mean, so it sucks because it makes sense. And also the way that their trauma presents with this too is like Jilly says, I picked him because he's strong and the curse is not going to get to him because he's so strong. So that's also like, that is where you see like the more calculated part of Jillian. Like the less chaotic is. What's ironic is she seems to have calculatedly picked him.
Yes.
Because she wanted to save herself from the trauma of the curse. So what's ironic is she picked him thinking he was a safe choice.
Which
Yeah.
is backwards completely.
Yeah, which says a lot about her compass. Her inner compass is all out of whack.
But if you've seen people who deal with a disinhibited attachment style, this is the type of person they are drawn to. Like, this doesn't feel unfamiliar.
Which is why people who grow up in abused households, like abusive households, will pick partners who then are abusive. And
Because that feels normal.
Right.
Yes.
Well, it's the idea of, which we've already kind of talked about, the chaotic part of this, but when you're used to chaos, you're used to the feelings, the extreme feelings that it brings on, and that feels more comfortable than something that's not chaotic. Even though really it's not comfortable, it feels we're
comfortable with what we know.
Exactly. We're comfortable with what we know to it, like how she thinks that he'll withstand the curse. That is so nonsensical, right? In terms of,
Like, if you're living in curses, I don't think curses are going to be stopped no matter how quote unquote strong
exactly.
the dude is.
Yeah.
And he did die, so he did not beat the curse.
Exactly.
And where was I going with this thought? Oh, because I was saying too, like, to give Jilly some, I mean, we're giving her a lot of credit with this because it comes from somewhere. She's not just being like a chaotic monster.
Yeah, exactly.
But also I think too with her, I mean, think about what she was modeled with in terms of love. Like, her mom completed suicide after losing her father. And then she would also see these women come to their aunt's house, like, in this chaotic state about, like, love. And so, like, the way the versions of love she saw were like, I will literally die for this other person.
And the fact that the aunts don't seem to have any romantic attachments whatsoever. And so, like, if her only option is, right, that's the only thing she sees. Women who aren't with men at all, or women who are only, like, will literally die for the person that they're in love with.
Well, these chaotic, messy relationships.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that love has to have that love. Like, when that woman comes in when they're little kids wanting the love spell, like, she is, like, sobbing, and you know what I mean? Like, she's like, I need him so much, I want to die. Like, you know, it's like she only sees, like, that's what love looks like. Mm-hmm. Is just this, like, this wild passion that makes you crazy and do crazy things. Which is unfortunate for Jilly, because that's not what it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, and you're right, like, and even with the ants, like, the stories they tell, like, in that one of those first scenes is like talking about her, like, Ethan, like her lover who died. So, like, death and destruction is a part of being in love for this girl,
for this family.
Yeah, for this family.
Absolutely.
So we've talked about Jillian a lot.
Yeah, we did.
So with Sally, we've kind of touched upon that already. Like, she's classic inhibited, very protective, very guarded. Like you were saying, Ben, her aunts have to quite literally put a magic spell on her to get her to open up and be vulnerable. They had to bind it with molasses just to get her legs to open.
Mm-hmm.
Which, man, Stockard Channing just got typecast right into this role too. It's just like,
oh, I love it so
Aunt
much.
Rizzo.
Yes.
Aunt Rizzo.
Yes.
But also Diane Weiss, just that shy little disposition.
I know. She's very sweet.
And I think what truly sucks for Sally, to put it glibly, and what we see in this movie is she finally opens herself up and is vulnerable and kind of becomes more like happier and open and more part of her community. And then her husband dies. And therefore she is traumatized, re-traumatized by that. Like, I did everything right. I finally, like, let down my guard, and I was punished for it.
Absolutely. And I still couldn't escape. I couldn't escape this. I did, even that feeling of, like, I did everything right, and it didn't fucking matter. And he still died. And now I have 2 little girls. So again, the re-traumatization and also the things that are just so fucking specific between her and Jilly and her daughters, whose names I don't remember.
Kylie and Antonia.
That's right.
Which one of them would then grow up to be an android in him.
I know.
Yeah.
We were watching it and I was like, can you believe we're still watching Evan Rachel Wood on TV now?
Now.
She's glorious.
And she's always been good.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
And so I think with Sally, then we see what would make 100% sense to me as a therapist is she doubles down then on, like,
absolutely,
her inhibitedness after she's re-traumatized. Well, I think one thing we see that we wanted to touch upon was she very clearly post her husband's death goes through very classic depressive symptoms.
Yes.
We see her in this movie where she's not even leaving her bed. She's like sleeping all the time to the point that like her daughter, poor little thing, is trying to like wake her up and like get her excited and kind of like trying to take care of her in that moment. And she says, I'm just so tired. I'm so sorry. I'm just so tired. And then she's also clearly not like taking care of herself in the sense that like Jillian's like, you need to brush your teeth. Like she's going through a very classic, like what we would call depressive episode where she's just like abandoning all her like activities of daily living and like not taking care of her kids, not taking care of herself. And I think when in bringing this up, we just wanted to outline that there is in the DSM, the diagnostic manual, there is like the diagnosis. I think is it a formal diagnosis of bereavement, right?
Bereavement is yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I don't think that's something we've touched upon on the show. Or if we have, it must have been very briefly, or I can't remember it at all.
Yeah, I can't remember it.
If for anyone who might not be aware, bereavement, like we were saying, is its own diagnosis in the diagnostic manual. And it is what it sounds like, which is after a big death, a death of any kind, you can exhibit symptoms that would be more aligned with another mental health diagnosis. In this case, it would be depression.
Yes.
And what we should mention about bereavement, which I was looking it up to make sure, is that bereavement is not a full diagnosis.
Okay. It's like an adjustment disorder.
No, it is a Z code.
No. Oh, my bad.
My bad as well.
When we talk, well, I mean, a Z code is still a diagnosis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's sort of, it's indicative of either a temporary situation or some kind of other factor affecting the client, which means that in the world of insurance land, if you put down bereavement as the primary diagnosis for a client, they are not going to pay for it.
Ugh, insurance.
Which is ridiculous because it is a condition that affects everyone every day because someone dies every day and people have to find time and space in their life to go through the emotional process of grief, like we talked about a whole lot in our previous spooky season episode.
Yes, indeed.
The Haunting of Hill House?
On The Haunting of Hill House.
Yeah.
Which, please let us know how you felt about that, our first TV episode. We'd love to hear it.
Yes.
Sure.
But when we talk about like the diagnostic codes of this, it is a Z code. It is not something that you can get diagnosed with fully. So it's something like the other things that are examples of Z code: problems with the family because of military leave, problems with somebody for returning from military leave, problems within the family for X, Y, and Z reason. There's addiction in the family. It doesn't affect your client directly, but the impact of having addiction in the family is something that is so potent and infused in the DNA of the family structure that it needs to be accounted for in the diagnostic code so that clinicians reading it can factor that into their treatment planning and their conceptualization of the client. So Z codes are essentially, we used to have a 5-tiered system for diagnosis. We no longer do, where the 5-axis system, where axis 1 would be the more mental health side of things, axis 2 would be the personality, axis 3 would be health, 4 would be social and emotional issues, and this is where that would fit, like psychosocial situations. It would be on the 4th axis, but that was done away with because reasons.
Well, and I feel like even in hearing you describe it, I feel like it's the situational factors. I feel like a lot of times when I work with clients and I talk about and they talk about all the things that they're struggling with, and I'm like, right, but you have a lot of situational factors that are overriding everything else. Like, yes, you have lifelong depression, but you're also in a relationship that is really hard. You hate your job. You're a single parent. Like, there's a lot of other things that can really affect the way, again, that in the moment, in that time, when you're in that situation, have such a big impact. So anyway, that's what I was thinking of when you were explaining that.
Right, and it can be complicated or uncomplicated. Which, when we see this family, like, this is complicated bereavement.
Because it's re-traumatization. It's systemic within this family.
Correct.
Yeah. It wasn't just like her husband died and that's the first death.
No.
She's encountered that's close to her.
Correct. And also, like, the idea of uncomplicated bereavement is essentially it lasts for about 30 days. Oof. You can you can expect someone to be, not that you don't continue feeling the effects of it, but that you're in the active,
it's like intense.
The intense, active, depressed, crying, struggling to adjust, struggling to know who you are. And I see this all the time with clients where they come in and out of the bereavement period where they, after about 30 days, after they've gotten through the funeral and the burial or the cremation, and they've reached some degree of finality with it, that they start to find a way to move their life forward with the loss, and they still keep a place for the loss, but they're not actively destroyed by it. And like we hit a point where we're supposed to be in that like totally not functional time where we need to sit and deal with these feelings and dealing with sadness, but it becomes complicated when it crosses that 30-day mark and when it starts to bleed into other areas of life. It bleeds into the family system. It becomes a constant narrative as opposed to something of, we lost someone in the family and that person's not here, but when it adds to the complicated side of things, it starts to look like what we see in this family, where it becomes a narrative every day, and everything and every thought revolves around that in some way, shape, or form. It has hooks in everything in the family system, and this is exactly what we see at this particular family, is that it is not it is not typical bereavement. It is complicated.
Yeah. She'd be a doozy to try to diagnose as a therapist.
Which one?
Both of them, but I think in talking about Sally, like if she came in with this presentation post her husband's death, because there's so much trauma parts of it, there's also like you'd have to kind of figure out like the extent of like the depressive symptoms, like were there any that displayed before her husband died, any sort of periods of her life, like you said, like how extensive is it now. I think what's hard about the movie is we don't have a sense of time about this. Like, how long has she been laying in bed for?
Yeah.
Like, is it just a week? Is it a month? Is it 3 months?
Right. We don't know there's no time frame given ever. I think, like, if you want me to give you my snap diagnosis of her, it is major depressive disorder, single episode, moderate, with a added Z code of bereavement.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I remember when I lost my grandparents when I was 25, and that was the first time that I had, that I was aware of, the first time that I had depressive symptoms that were so overwhelming that like I couldn't go to work. I was crying every day on the way to work. I was crying in the bathroom. I was like, I was having a hard time feeding myself, being really impulsive in other ways. Like it was very very, very intense. And I remember that was the first time I tried medication, but it was really hard because the doctor at that time, I wasn't in the field. So I was like seeing my regular MD, who was very sweet. But at the same time, like she didn't really explain to me that it was mostly that I was experiencing, I have major depressive disorder, but that the bereavement piece was really making everything just feel like I didn't know who I was. My identity was shaken, and it lasted for, I was in that condition for like, I would say almost 10 months before I really had really felt like myself at all.
And I think, thank you for sharing that, Hannah. And I think like hearing like the depressive part of it, I think this is what's interesting about like also the subjectivity that is diagnosing is I think if Sally came into my office, I think I'd give her adjustment disorder from her husband's death and then have the bereavement piece of it. Yeah. And then as I got to know her, I might change it to major depressive disorder as I got to work with her longer. Yeah. But I think because this is such a big, because adjustment disorder, you give it to someone adjustment disorder when something has happened that they're having trouble adjusting to, and it's presenting in a variety of possible diagnoses, depressive symptoms, anxious symptoms, yada yada. Like there's different
conduct and behavior disturbance.
Yeah. And so I think because this is such a big shift because what sucks about being a therapist and insurance is that you have to give someone a diagnosis as soon as you meet them, pretty much. And so sometimes you give them something just to get it on the books with the insurance, and then as you work with them, you can change it, or you may change it as you get to know more.
And Adjustment disorder is often an appropriate diagnosis for many situations. However, your insurance will frequently start denying that claim after about 4 to 6 weeks.
Which sucks.
Well, I mean, because the specifiers on that one is that with adjustment disorder, it also has, essentially a simple and a complicated, where like adjustment disorder or acute and chronic, right? Is that the term? I can't remember which one. They changed it in 5.
Yeah, because they changed it where acute adjustment disorder is how it used to always be, which is that you can only have adjustment disorder for that brief period of time, because then after that 5 weeks is up and you're still having symptoms, then it must be indicative of something more like depression or anxiety disorder.
Yeah.
But now they have it where it's chronic, which is that if the thing you're adjusting to keeps happening or is constant, then but you don't have any symptoms outside of that situation that you're adjusting to, now you can keep it. But Ben's right in that if you decide to give your client adjustment disorder chronic, and so that stays their diagnosis for a while, you will have to probably talk to someone at the insurance company and make a very strong case why you ethically are comfortable giving them a different diagnosis.
Right, which will be a long and detailed conversation that might include some opinions, but basically, like you can give it acute or chronic, and if it lasts for 6 months or more, but really oftentimes where they're going to tell you, and to some degree they're right, is that if it goes beyond that point and it starts affecting that many systems in their life, can you really still make the argument that it is just because of the whatever that they've adjusted to? Like after they moved and that was a big adjustment, but like they've been in this new place for 6 months, they've been in a new place with work. Like the obvious answer that we can all make an argument for is, yes, of course, losing your husband is something that would require a ton of adjusting, and moving to the house that you grew up in obviously is an adjustment and obviously is a lot. But the feel I got from this movie is that these events happened at least a year later. This is kind of what we talked about off mic, and that at the point that we're at, like this is. Some time has passed. If she is still exhibiting these symptoms at this point, would major depressive disorder be a better descriptor of the general demeanor that she has? I mean, it's like that's why I said like before, it's like a snap diagnosis, because I don't disagree with you at all that adjustment disorder is absolutely something that could be appropriately given. I do not disagree. Just the reality of how and why we would go through this as therapists, as we're sitting at like considering our case conceptualization, these are the questions we have to ask. And part of the reasoning is because sometimes claims will get denied under certain codes. So we also have to consider the client's needs too, of like, look, they want this to get paid for.
Yes.
Do we have to give the higher level of severity diagnosis in order to get it covered? Because like we even see Sally go through, like, her depression starts off with more of the moderate range. I don't think we ever see her in severe, but we see her for sure in the moderate range where symptoms are impacting her, and she's having moments where she's shutting down, but none of those seem to be preventing her from parenting.
Well, she's sleeping in bed all the time, and it seems like
she is, but
her daughters are dressing themselves and getting themselves to school.
But she's also still going to work.
Not at that point, I don't
she's
think.
not.
She hasn't done that yet.
She hadn't done that? Okay,
no, at the point where, like, she's laying in bed all day
severe.
and Jilly comes to visit her, she says that she was starting to do, like, the shampoos and stuff.
Yeah.
But she hadn't opened her business yet. So at that point, she's, like, fully shut down. She's not doing anything. Like, she's very severe at that point.
Okay, so
because I saw
that differently, but I concede. I think you're right. I think you're right. That she was there, so...
Yeah.
Good. This is why we do this, right? We have these conversations even in supervision, because somebody's going to see something you might miss, and I obviously missed that one.
And also Hannah and I have watched this movie. I would say a conservative estimate would be 100 times each.
Oh my God.
Yes.
That's, I mean,
I could tell you beat for beat this whole movie from start to finish right now if pressed.
Which is good, but that's why I'm deferring to your expertise here, right? Because,
our expertise in practical magic.
I do not have it. I do not have it.
Listen, I defer to you about Star Wars.
As you should.
As I should.
As you should. As, just the fact that I'm in the 501st should be like automatic deferment, pretty much. Because that's a whole thing. But
indeed.
In the reality of like you guys knowing this better, but seeing that, because like the way I interpret it, it's like those scenes happen so fast.
They do happen fast. You're not wrong.
The time for me felt like okay, well, like she's. The way I interpreted it was she's just shutting down in moments where she has the availability to shut down. And my interpretation of severe, I'm really conservative if I'm going to give someone a severe depression diagnosis.
Oh, absolutely.
Very conservative about that, because the implications of severe depressive disorder, like you can have psychotic symptoms at that point because you're shutting down so much. And I didn't see that out of her.
Yeah.
So like this is where like the diagnostic conversation becomes interesting. Is for me, like when I think of severe, I think completely incapable of getting out of bed, generally, like, or not really doing the things that you need to do, not really responding to other people as much, like just staying in bed, staying down, feeling down, not engaging with things, feeling so down and depressed that most everything is really difficult to do. And while it looked obvious that she was having moments of that, it didn't seem like she was fully there to a point where I would give it, but I think you guys seeing it more times and going like, maybe she was there.
I mean, I interpret it as she was there for like a few weeks.
Yeah.
Is how I would assume. Seeing that we have no time frame,
right? My
assumption is it's like a few weeks of her being that way.
Right.
Maybe not longer than that, but that was how I was gauging it.
And that's fair, because I have the one time I watched it, the one impression, and that was it. But you guys obviously have a different one, and that's I think give it to you.
You're making a good point. Like if people ever wanted to get in the peek inside of a therapist's mind or discussion, like this is what we would call differentiating diagnosis,
right?
Which is when we are actively trying to figure out, is it this or is it this? So you're hearing the active discussion that is trying to when we within ourselves even or with each other about like what really is going on, which is why if having a diagnosis helps you wrap your head around yourself and learn treatment and gives you a sense of comfort, more power to you. And also don't worry about it if you're like have feelings about your diagnosis that aren't great. Like it's truly like subjective in a lot of ways. Well, you know what I mean.
In some ways,
yeah.
I feel like insurance very much has a big hand in this.
Yes.
When I talk to clients about diagnosis, I say, here's the thing: diagnosis is for insurance. I said, in terms of sometimes it can be helpful, and if it's helpful and you want to talk about it, let's do that. I have no problem doing psychoeducation, but what I do want you to understand is that this is the only reason why we have, in some ways, the only reason why we have to do this and are only allowed to use certain codes is because of fucking insurance.
Correct.
So if we didn't have insurance, I feel like my diagnosis, to be perfectly honest, would shift in a lot of ways, because what I feel like I try to do is give the least stigmatized
yes
general diagnosis that I can give. Not because, but unless it does feel like something, either there's something that is very present or something that just doesn't make sense in terms of that. But just honestly, that's what I do, because for me, it depends on our relationship. It depends on what you're coming to me with. And that's what we treat. I feel like really I treat trauma. That's what I treat all the time.
That's what we all treat all the time.
Right.
I know I'm biased here, but I will always tell you, I tell my clients too, like, I'm going to tell you flat out about me and my perception of things. It's always trauma. It's not always PTSD, but it's always trauma.
Yes. Because she'd be a case where I'd be like, there's so much trauma in her life and it's so definitive of her, and she doesn't qualify for PTSD.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I can't give that to her, though that is the defining factor of her life. And honestly, with her, and I guess what I meant is, don't get hung up on your diagnosis unless it's positively meaningful for you, because as you're hearing from us talking, it's someone's point of view that it's defined by semantics or by a manual, but it's also like interpretation.
And the manual, is, while it is very valuable, it was created for a specific purpose by specific people that is not always representative of all of the fields that will be using it. It is heavily biased towards the medical model, which many...
And white males were the ones who fucking write it.
That is not entirely true.
I don't care.
That is not true.
Because I think what sucks for Sally is...
not true.
If I could give Sally whatever I felt like giving her, I would probably just slap bereavement on her and then just roll with that for as long as I could.
Right.
And her husband died. I'm helping her with her husband. Because I think what sucks about what you said a while back about like how Z codes aren't like diagnoses that insurance will pay for.
They will absolutely not pay for them.
It is trash that because Z codes are the real shit that bring you into therapy outside of like you know what I mean?
Now, now that is a phrase I wish I would have used because that, Brittany, is the true spirit of it. Like, I'm like explaining it like a clinician. You're like, look, that's the shit that brought you in the fucking door, okay?
Yeah, exactly. Your problems with your relationship.
Kudos to Brittany on that
your
one.
Your problems was your job. Absolutely.
Because I think like, I think Dr. Drew Pinsky say this a while back. I have my own stuff with him, so I'm not saying this like he's the best, but I used to idolize him for a long time. But he did say one thing once, which I do love, which he goes, I wish there was 2 categories to therapy and mental health. You go into therapy because you do have a clinical diagnosis that you need help treating, or you go into therapy because you're trying to be a better person or live a better life. You know what I mean? And so it's like, it's a shame that insurance will only pay for one of those things. So then we have to shove everybody into that clinical category.
Absolutely.
Even though a lot of people come to therapy, like we were saying, for bereavement, for relationship issues, for like childhood stuff, for whatever adjustment to whatever. And it's a shame that we can't just leave that be.
It's a shame that insurance has this big of a weight in terms of what it looks like we do on paper. I think that's the part of it that really feels insignificant in terms of what we actually do with people, and how, while knowing their symptoms, I feel like is always important, right? Because we want to know what they're struggling with the most.
Yeah.
But at the same time, in terms of the paperwork aspect, for me, it's like in a lot of ways, it's very separate for me. Like, I know that I hold on to certain things, but it's a lot more about symptoms and how can this get covered for the client?
How can it get covered is a big deal. The thing that most clients also want is to have their insurance pay for their treatment, and so that it's not a financial strain on them. And that's part of why we have this conversation the way we did, because we've all been doing this for a while in multiple settings where we've seen insurance become a problem, where clients who obviously still need treatment are forced to reduce or stop coming to therapy because their insurance is going like, well, you're probably fine now.
Or people who won't go to therapy at all because they don't want to get slapped with a big diagnosis. Because though we're all trying to move through, I think what sucks about it too is that we don't want to continue the stigma of diagnosis by like being so like careful and guarded about it. And I do recognize that there can be real world implications or like consequences for getting certain diagnoses, like
absolutely,
in like fields of work you want to do, things like that, like having a diagnosis get slapped on you because you went to therapy once can impact you. And so it's a shame because it will keep people or just like the stigma of it period will keep people from coming in the door, which just sucks.
It will, and it most certainly does, especially for certain professions.
Yeah.
And like I've had some people like tell me like they got like screwed out of getting a police or fire or federal job because somebody gave them a diagnosis, and then that diagnosis, probably shouldn't be this profession. And then like you work with them and go like, number one, I don't see how that diagnosis has anything to do with them not being able to do the profession. And also I don't agree with your diagnosis.
And that's what sucks about it too, is that like you could see someone who gives you a major diagnosis and it might not even be correct. Right. And it'll follow you possibly the rest of your life.
And the other thing it can do is, and why we like are careful with it, Mike, I'm saying like I'm really hesitant to give severe ever, that's probably my bias, because you two are like, I don't know, she looks pretty severe, but then
but my bias is I would give her adjustment for a little bit, as long as I probably could.
Right.
And then I'd switch her to depressive if she kept seeing me.
Right. How do you factor out the bereavement and the adjustment with...
Absolutely.
Like, is it really severe depression, or is it like all this shit combining to be a tidal wave of awful as her life is completely reorganizing?
Yeah. And I feel like the only thing that is missing for me, and maybe this is either just the way I think about it, but is that there also doesn't seem to be necessarily any suicidality that she's experiencing. No. I feel like people who have people that I would diagnose with severe depression, I feel like have a regular suicidal thoughts that are consistent and persistent. And so that's one of the things that I feel like when I give someone severe. So I do feel like that I don't know that that's something that we actually see with her. Although by not taking care of ourselves, that could just be like, that's just another way to show that like you don't care about being alive, but not necessarily actually having the thoughts or following through with anything. So I feel like that would be the only thing. That's something that I consider when I work with people. And I, again, try very hard not to give a severe diagnosis, just because, again, it doesn't matter. It doesn't change how I help someone. And insurance companies, I have a lot of feelings about insurance companies.
She does.
And I feel like they don't need to know any fucking more than I am willing to tell them. It's none of their fucking business.
All they need to know is what they need to know to pay the bill.
Exactly.
Which is, like the reality of it, and why I'm thankful in my, one of my two jobs that I don't have to do that, and that has changed so much of my perspective, is that I don't have to do any of that, and very deliberately do not. And it changes so much to, like, rather than like go through a lot of the things you have to go through to get the right diagnostic code for the insurance, like what we're talking about with her is like, you can just sit down with the person and go, why are you here?
Yes.
What's bringing you in?
Yes. And so though this is slightly a tangent, I think it's also a very important topic about like how the complications that come with when there's a situational factor on top of maybe clinical symptoms that are coming up, and how that does impact what's written on paper about you. Because what does suck about it, which we've kind of mentioned, is that you're unlike the medical way of thinking, where if you have this diagnosis, you get this treatment. A lot of mental health stuff, it's the same treatment. Like, someone sees me with depression, we do the same shit I would do if they had anxiety. And so what sucks about it is that the diagnosis we slap on it doesn't necessarily, if at all, dictate the treatment we give them. Yeah. It's so purely insurance.
Yeah, it really
unless, like I said, it gives you some clarity about who you are and resources about that.
Exactly. And I've had that experience with clients before who, like, once they felt like there was something that really validated how they were feeling, that it really felt worthwhile to them. And just also as a side note, I know that we're kind of talking about insurance a lot. We actually did an episode with the Mental Health Avengers with Capes on the Couch, Guardians of Mental Health, that you can find on
Pop
our
Psych 101.
Pop Psych, yeah, there's a couple of us.
And Freudian Sips.
And we do a whole episode where we just talk about the struggle of insurance for everybody, not only for access for clients, but also for us as clinicians, and kind of how tricky it is. And anyway, so if you want to hear more about it, if you haven't already heard enough, you can check out that episode too. I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, which is great. And there's more of those coming. We're actively scheduling some more, because those are all great podcasts. So if you guys haven't listened to Capes on the Couch, Pop Psych 101, done any of the awesome work that the Guardians MH are doing, because they do some awesome stuff with not only being a podcast, but they get on to...
they're a nonprofit organization now who's like helping different mental health in general, like in terms of it as a field. They're really doing amazing things.
And they're like in like the tri-state area, right? Like
they're in Canada.
They're in Canada.
I thought they were in like New York.
That's Capes on the Couch.
Oh yeah,
that's Anthony.
They're in New
Doc.
Jersey.
Okay.
Yeah.
Capes and Couches in New Jersey. The Guardians MH are kind of all over. They have people in various places, and they get on. They help with a lot of the stuff that goes on in video games, and do some stuff on Discord. So if you are a gamer into that culture, those are really good people to connect with because they get you.
Yeah.
And Freudian Sips is another awesome podcast. All these people are like a mother and daughter that kind of talk about mental health because both of them are therapists. So you get the perspective of someone who's been doing it for a while and then someone who's a little bit newer in the field and kind of seeing their relationship as professionals and really mother-daughter.
Yeah, it's a really lovely podcast.
Yeah, so if you're starving for more psych knowledge, outside of us, there's a lot out there that we collaborate with for sure.
Right. There's a lot of people that care about mental health and do awesome shows, and it's not just us. And as much as we like to toot our own horns, especially me with my shameless self-promotion problems,
but we probably wouldn't be where we are without you, Ben.
So, in order to rein this back into our
yes.
So I think
also wait, time out. Please take a second and rate us on iTunes and Facebook and anywhere possibly to give us ratings because that actually helps us and our friends in the Mental Health Avengers to
get found
and get seen by more people. And it's not just our
egos.
In my egos or in my terms of diagnosis of myself, my benign narcissism that malignant narcissism is one thing. I don't think I have that, but benign, probably. As anyway, but please help us because it helps us get our voices out and work on our mission as well as the rest of the Mental Health Avengers to defeat stigma and help people understand that we all consume things about mental health all day, every day, but yet let the judgments about what getting mental health treatment may be like from our communities, from our cultures, from the multiple subcultures we're in and the macro cultures, all of that creates barriers to getting treatment, despite the fact that the most interesting stories we consume and most interesting characters we all analyze ourselves are all struggling with mental health, and we all watch their journey while ignoring ours, and we want to make sure that this message gets out to everybody. So please do that.
Mm-hmm. So,
reining us in.
Back to practical magic. I think kind of what you were saying, Hannah, about the suicidality, which is a fancy schmancy way of saying like suicidal thinking, or like any part of like, are you planning? Are you thinking about it? Are there any intent to follow through with any like suicidal behaviors? Is I do feel like I didn't think of it this way until we watched it through the eyes of therapists. But when Jilly comes home to visit Sally, I do think we were talking about how she might be very subtly trying to like assess for suicide with Sally, because this is also probably a little re-traumatizing for Jillian.
Absolutely.
Because their mom completed suicide after their father died, and now she's seeing that her sister is like not living, really
not functioning
post her husband's death. And so her coming all the way home and her being with Sally, and she says that thing of like, do you forgive our mother? And I wonder if that's Jillian very tentatively trying to like assess suicide within Sally.
Ooh.
Like, good. Like, are you thinking about it? Are you understanding where mom's coming from? Are you feeling like maybe she had a point there with, you know?
Like that. I feel like that the very subtle of just like bringing it up.
Yeah.
It's like, hey girl, do you remember that this is what happened to us as little girls? Like, do you like,
and then she follows that up with,
good
you have
insight.
to get up. You have to brush your teeth. You have to take care of your daughter.
Absolutely.
Like she follows that up with like, I'm bringing this up and I'm saying you can't. You absolutely cannot.
Right. You have value and a role here, and you have the responsibility to not repeat the same trauma that we went through, and the only way you can do that is by finding your meaning and purpose again as their mother, as a person with value and things left to give this world.
And I think she does a good job, like, for how chaotic how much we've been just like shitting on Jillian kind of in terms of her emotional fortitude.
Yeah.
She does do a great job with Sally of like, she comes home, she listens to Sally, she lets Sally vent and just cry and cathart. Then she also is silly with her and talks about her own love life, but not in a narcissistic way where she comes home and she just starts talking about her boyfriend and like forgetting the fact that her husband just died. Like, it's more like,
it just feels
making
thoughtful.
Sally feel normal again.
Yeah.
Like, And she also gets Sally to talk about the things that were positive. Like she's talking about what her happy memories of her husband and like her ambitions with like the natural soaps and shampoos. And so actually Jillian does like a great job of pulling Sally out.
Yeah.
Of like letting her vent and process her grief, and also like talking about joy too, which is a delicate balance. And I think that I don't have any sisters, but I attribute it to the fact that they have like this, that is the part of them that they've been in this together since they were born.
Absolutely.
And like they have all that history, and they're like, it's that thing where she doesn't have to explain anything to Jilly. Jilly gets it.
Yes.
And then that's also why Jilly can probably get away with very tentatively bringing up their mom and saying, you have to get your shit together. Because also I think if Sally also decided to complete suicide, that would be the end of Jillian. Like, I don't think she could have kept, like, that would have been too much.
Think, yeah, I totally agree. I don't think that I think Jillian would implode. Like, I think she would.
Because I think Sally's the only person she truly cares about.
I think she wouldn't know, which actually we're about to talk about. I don't think that Jilly would know who she is if Sally isn't alive, because that part of that shared experience, that part of that grief, that her attachment is to her sister.
Yes.
And if she doesn't have that attachment, I don't think that she knows who she is.
Because no one else really matters to Jilly, because they talk about how like she rose through all these men. I wish a man would go through her. Like, she's not like, because even like I said, the way she talks about Jimmy, she doesn't talk about him like she's in love with him. She talks about
not
him
at all.
Like he is a good pick. Like she's detached from him too. And
like she's just having like he's just like the person that she's fucking with right now, but like she doesn't seem to have any like real true emotional attachment to him.
Nope.
And
Nope. So what Hannah did just there was a masterful way to therapists use all the time to let's going to segue into this next topic. Which I'm going to be the blunt instrument on. And moving on into acceptance and identity, the second portion of this film, and how we reach the resolution, because we've talked about all the rising actions and the conflict, but now we're going to talk about how we reach the resolution, which is also, conveniently enough, one of the ways we reach resolution in mental health and in therapy, which is what we see happen when both of these young women, as well as the community and their aunts and their children, find an acceptance of who they are, what they are, and authentically engage in themselves, in their culture, and unashamedly do so, and also find company and power in the availability of camaraderie with other women to overtake abusive men. And like what I find interesting about this movie is that despite Aidan Quinn's character being a police officer investigating on all this thing, like none of those tropes really play through. Is that he is not the hero of this film that comes in and sweeps and saves the day.
No, he does not.
He does not. He kind of watches all that happen. But the true power of the resolution to this problem is by women coming together and stopping judging each other, stopping becoming barriers to each other, stop competing with each other, and accept themselves and each other for who they are and what they are, and the inherent power in that forms their coven that helps to take down this malevolent beast.
Listening to you talk about this, Ben, makes me so happy I might cry.
Yeah, I'm feeling very...
like my eyes just teared up.
I feel like I'm blushing.
I mean, for real though, sisters are doing it for themselves, as the song says.
Yeah.
And it's exactly right. It's because it's like acceptance and identity on several levels in this movie. We have the super micro level, which is their identity within their family, which I think we see too with like we said, like their differing presentations, where Sally, because when kids have grief and trauma and loss very young in their lives, they will get in these very rigid roles. Sally's very much the caretaker, and Jillian's very much like the baby who gets taken care of. And so there's that identity that I think they both have comfort in, but also it's fucking them up. And then there's the slightly more macro, which is they're the town they live in
rejects them unless they need something.
Yes, where they like.
Secret.
And everyone's
Really
talking
secret.
about them, rumors about them. It's so funny. Like, I was like watching it again when Aidan Quinn's interviewing people in the town and they talk to that lady holding the big book. I'm like, can you imagine living in a town where there seems to be an historian who specializes in you and your family?
Right.
When she's reading that book and she's like, well, any man who dares, like the way she's talking about it, I'm like, can you even imagine living in a town where their like thesis is about you?
Right,
and you're just one of their neighbors. You're not like the
Sanderson
mayor or founder
sisters.
of the town. You
Yeah,
found
it's not like they own the town or something.
They just live in it.
They just happen to live there in this house. Like,
Yeah.
that's it.
So there's like the slightly more macro of like their identity within this town, which is like capital O others, as like witches, as like we see with like their PTA meeting when she's ostracized Sally from the community of like other mothers. And then you're saying, Ben, like the macro level, which is womanhood, sisterhood, which is like acceptance within the community because of, like you're saying, because the patriarchy has conditioned women to be competitive.
Yes.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yes, I know I talked about it before. I don't remember which one of our more recent episodes. I think it's the one on Scream that I talked about, like homophobia essentially being the fear of other men in men, but the same thing applies to women. Is like in order to fit in with your group, that you have to be in some degree of homogeneity, and the pressure on women to do that is so much more intense than it is on men.
Crushing.
Well, it's like with the whole thing with Jillian and her identity within the town of being like a slut, basically, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
Is like as soon as she shows up at that PTA meeting, just trying to see Sally, like they're whispering about her, they're saying heinous things about her, like even the one woman saying like, she used to sleep with Coach whatever, like even in that narrative, when you really think about it, my assumption is that there must have been a rumor in high school or whatever that she was fucking the coach. And even in that situation, that they're not thinking about the fact that she was a child in that dynamic. Like even if she truly was having a sexual relationship with the coach, which maybe she was because of all the attachment stuff we've talked about,
Right.
she was still the victim or the person being preyed upon.
Yeah, absolutely.
In that narrative.
Right, and the slut shaming that happens in small towns, especially when everybody knows your business.
And they know, like, and your grandmas grew up together, like, when it's just, like, generations of everyone up each other's asses.
Like,
Yeah, no
totally.
doubt.
Like, I have known young women who dealt with such things from small rural communities where, like, the shame and the guilt, like, caused of the societal pressure from other women and other people in the town would lead to decisions being made about themselves and their future that have maybe not necessarily are in line with what they want, but because the pressure is so intense. And I feel like this movie did a really good job of like driving that point so hard, but yet in such a way that is still enough to feel like it's within the story, that they're not forcing it down someone's throat, but like that the whole point of the story here is showing like, look, there is power in becoming who you are. Mm-hmm. There is power in accepting your family. There is a power accepting that you're a part of this family. There's a power in rejecting everybody else's bullshit and going, yeah, that's who I am. Mm-hmm. And we see that in Jilly going like, yeah, hello, I'm here. I'm going to sleep with your husbands. Deal with it.
Yep, absolutely.
And there's a power in that you take away from other people the ability to manipulate and control you. And, like with all of the female clients that I see, like this is a huge problem. And I also see it like my wife is part of the Mama Tribe Facebook group in Chicago. And if any of you are part of that and are listening to this, stop it.
Just stop it.
Like, just stop it. You guys are awful to each other. Like, the dads groups that I'm in are, like, all supportive. And the dads are, like, dads raising fathers or dads fathering daughters together. Like, the guys are going on there. They're supporting each other. Like, nobody's criticizing anybody. Nobody's telling anybody they're doing it wrong. No mom shaming, no slut shaming, no none of that. The guys are just supportive as hell. And either that or they make the most ridiculously hilarious jokes at things.
Also known as dad jokes.
No, these are better than dad jokes.
I don't think you can judge that.
But they're the good variety of dad jokes, such as like,
it's not a thing.
I've noticed my toddler is continually climbing out of my crib. What's the best way to deal with that? Turn it over. Like, just like the most, turn it into like a little jail. Yes. Anyway, but like the community.
Great point.
Just cram it, okay?
Just walking
It
into your own
evolved from
point,
there
huh?
into like 10,000 points, such as like, well, just control their behavior the way you control theirs. Lie out a ton of Legos around the bed. They'll step out of it once barefoot, won't do it again. Or you've seen Jurassic Park, right? Electrified fence. Anyway, yeah. See, laughing. Anyway, the things that we see is that like the communities that exist among women to women are so full of critical energy, where there's competition and just wicked levels of competition and shaming and putting people into like, well, if you're not doing it this way, you're doing it wrong, and this pop is wrong, and you're wrong, and you're mothering wrong, and everything about you is wrong, and it's just vicious.
And I think it calls back. I mean, I think it's indicative of like how fragile identity is, and how when we define ourselves by very specific roles, like I assume I'm not a mom, so I can't speak to that, but my assumption would be like by being a good mother or not a good mother, you know what I mean? Like there's it's you're so easily threatened then, and I think the weight
that we put on
mothers to be perfect, and fathers can just fucking
it's like there's
we still say
fathers can change a diaper, good for them. Like,
well, we still say like, are you babysitting on Friday? And it's like your own fucking kids.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
But I think what sucks too about this town in particular, and how unfortunately judgmental women can be, is like Sally hasn't done anything quote unquote wrong. Like she is wearing the right clothes, she's doing the right stuff, she's actively trying to be quote unquote normal.
Yeah.
And yet, because of just her family reputation, she is ostracized and shit upon. Like, she's fucked.
Yep.
And I think that's what's so poisonous about this, on top of the fact that it's poisonous, period.
Yeah.
But, like, especially in this situation, like, there's no freedom from it if the macro community won't forgive whatever they're hung up on.
Yeah.
And because Sally can't win. Like, she can't be on the top of the phone tree. Even though she's doing everything probably more right in terms of their rules than the other mothers are, because she's trying so hard to be correct.
Right, which shows like the point of this movie, the point in which she stops giving a fuck about that and starts going like, so here's the thing, I'm a witch.
Yeah, when she's like, all right. Because that is a way that you can confront social norms, is like if you just like, and like by just like, sorry, I don't know if you can hear that car.
There's some honking.
Motherfuckers.
You basically just want that guy from Family Guy to be like your general attitude. What is Patty? Is that his name? Like, so what, you want to fight about it?
I don't know.
We were just actively shitting on Family Guy before you showed up today.
Yeah, so no comment.
I mean, it's been on too long.
But I would say, it's just that. I lost my train of thought with that car horn. But it is this thing where like you can't like win for losing, and so you might as well just like lean into it and just say, yeah, you're right. Because it's like because the thing is those kind of rules and norms and competitive only hold up when everyone's playing that game. And as soon as you decide you're not playing that game anymore, it like upheaves the whole situation. And either people get really like, ooh, and they really double down, or they're just like, oh shit. And it's like it unmoors them. What's the word I'm looking for? It like shakes them up enough that
everyone's a good SAT word, way to put it.
That everyone kind of stops playing the game.
It unravels.
Yeah, it unravels. That's a good way to put it.
Well, and it takes away the identified other from this situation too.
Yeah.
Of now she's one of us, because now we're all together, because she's connecting to us on a way of like she's showing her vulnerability. So rather than continuing to pursue it, which was a beaubeautiful turn for this movie to take, because that's not always the way it goes.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like that bitch is a witch. Get the torches.
Oh, right.
Because it is that thing of like exactly what you're saying, Ben, which I try to remind myself of, because believe it or not, I have a problem with vulnerability. I'm much more of a Sally type. Is that what I have learned doing this work is that more often than not, people are waiting for the first person to be vulnerable. And then once the vulnerability starts to show, other people will match that vulnerability.
Yep.
More often than not.
Right.
Absolutely.
And so I think with this, I mean, because because these women who, especially that one woman who's reading off the phone tree, I can't remember her name, like they're not happy. Like they're just as caught up in
not
this
in those
like
clothes.
in this like
No.
exactly.
Nobody's
they're
happy.
They're just
Get
caught
out of
up in this like negative toxic cycle too. Like nobody's
Absolutely.
having a good time. They're all just trying to play the game the best.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so as soon as she's like, fuck this game, they're like, you know what? You're right. Fuck this game. And then they all just like start hanging out.
Right, and they embrace them, and like the happy music
Yeah.
starts playing, and eventually, like, you know, we see.
Yep.
Oh yeah, Brittany
Yep.
Souls.
And Brittany just was vulnerable to you all there, right
Yeah,
there.
because I hated that when I did it.
I'm just gonna, because I think like if I have like any like character in this movie, I might be more like the kooky aunt who like is a little antagonistic.
I think that's perfect, and I think we should do a Halloween costume like that, where you play that role.
Dude, do I get crazy hair and a big ass hat?
You get
Because
a
Oh
big
my
I'm
god,
hat.
absolutely.
You gotta be carrying like a turnip or something.
like I feel
Yeah,
like I'm
yeah.
like Barbosa, like big hat.
Yeah.
That's
You can do
I'm motivated by
midnight
a big ass
margaritas.
hat.
You can do
We
midnight
could.
margaritas.
That'd be so much fun.
The lime and the coconut.
The lime and the coconut.
They
But
drink it all up.
I'd just like to point out that the thing you have told me routinely that you hate, that I have
Yep.
been secretly plotting to do to you this
Yeah.
first second I get, which is exactly why you've avoided this situation, is you hate when people look at you and sing.
I do.
And you just look dead at me and sang.
Listen, the power of practical magic cannot be measured, and its influence on my life. It casts a spell on me. But no, I think.
Lime and the coconut.
See now I hate it. See now I hate it.
Brittany just turned like Hannah has this thing in her place where we are right now that there's like different colors of pink that go from like light pink to kind of magenta to red, and I'm trying to figure out which color Brittany just turned.
Oh, rude.
Anyway,
But
back to the point.
I think, like, we've talked a lot about Sally with acceptance and identity, but I think Jillian, too, like, the reason that she runs away when she's running away at, like, probably 17 or 18 is she says, like, I gotta get out of here. I gotta go away from this town where everyone knows who we are.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Jillian very much is trying, all of her choices, I think, are her trying to be her own person outside of being an Owens, outside of being whatever this hillbilly town, this like New England hillbilly town that they're in. Like she's trying to be her own person and carve her own path. I mean, she goes way hard in the other direction which is what's tricky about like identity work.
Yeah.
Is like, are you still trying to be someone else? Are you trying on another identity? Are you actually being yourself? Because as Jilly kind of starts to like become more of herself in this movie, like she stays at home. Like at the end of the movie, she is gardening in a big hat too.
Yeah.
With her aunts in the garden holding the cat. Like
Absolutely.
Like, and so it makes you do wonder how much of her is like her family that she's acting like she's not, because she's so trying so hard, which is very normal to like, because very typical where you're trying to be your own person so much that you swing so hard for the fences that you're still not yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, because you want to make sure, and as the more Jillian version of the character as me, is that you go so
Absolutely.
hard. You go so hard in the other. Fuck the both of you. You go so hard.
You brought it up.
But I feel like it's like too much energy from you two. Just like.
You mean like too much? We just waited for you to say it so we could spring on that shit because it's that true.
That you were waiting, and I'm mad about it. Shit, I lost my train of thought.
As the identity piece, trying to be someone else.
That you go so hard that you want to make sure that you're not going to turn out like them.
Yeah.
You go so hard in the other direction that that's what you're attempting to do. And that's not authentic either.
Yeah. And I think that's why you end up in these like her like with these bad relationships and things like that, is she's still and like falling into an abusive relationship, though I don't want it to sound like I'm blaming her, because that guy sucks no matter what. But it's because she's not listening to her own intuition.
Yes.
At all.
No, she's not. And also, that guy is. We've said it before, and we keep saying it so that people that encounter people like this understand that these people are masters at picking their targets.
Yeah, like he seeks her out. Like he sees her from across the pool, and he's like,
"Gotcha."
Yes. And he comes up behind her, like he gets in her space, he touches her, he puts a blindfold on her. Like he very quickly, I mean, he's never heard of consent a day in his life.
Oh, no, never.
Like,
I mean, he doesn't consider that a factor.
It's not a thing.
It doesn't occur to him.
Yeah, and so like he very much is a predator who puts her, who unmoors her,
Yes.
very quickly. And so yeah, I think it's a shame because it is like that. These two poor. I mean, it's an obvious example of like these two little girls went through a lot of things when they were very young to shake up their lives and tear parts of their identity, because your parents are how you become your identity.
Absolutely.
Like how you formulate who you are is so closely, if not almost entirely, informed by your parents.
Yes.
And they lost their parents when they were very little, and even though they luckily did not really lose any resources, they went to go live in a big ass house with two loving aunts who really tried to love them who did love them unconditionally.
Yeah.
And was very silly with them. And also, like, one thing I noted watching it this time was there's the scene in the beginning when they're girls and they're talking about, which wasn't a great topic for the ants to talk about, like their deaths in their lives, like how they're cursed as a family and stuff. But I do think what was healthy about the ants, which I liked, was they could tell that the conversation was upsetting Sally and Jilly. And so instead of them making them do schoolwork, they go, let's just have fun. Let's just go do something fun. Basically in that moment, they were prioritizing these little girls' mental health over like their academics and shit like that.
They were moving to self-care.
Yes.
They were like, hey, let's go do spells.
Yeah.
Like
your homework will be there in the morning.
Exactly. And how that kind of emotional intelligence in a really big way of helping them understand that sometimes how we feel and getting our needs met is more important than anything else.
Yeah.
And how often we, as a society, that is like one of the only things I try to help get through to people. You are allowed to you are allowed to be the most important thing.
Yeah.
It's not selfish. It's learning how to take really good care of yourself so that you're able to have the capacity to deal with what you have to deal with. And that if we don't do that, like, I feel like it's such a good example. I'm going to go off on a really short tangent, then I'm going to stop. A really good example of that is how the society is not adapting to the fact that we are in a pandemic and trying to force kids and teachers to pretend like it's normal school. And it is really creating a lot of problems, even for students who are good students. And it's so hard because their mental health is being fucking ignored.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I'm not going to say anything else about it.
Well, and I think
the vice president's holding a masks optional thing at a retirement community, so
Whew, okay.
We gotta reel it in. We gotta reel it in.
So I would say with this, I wonder too if, like, I'm sure what plays a big part in Sally and Jillian getting to the place there at the end of this movie where they're accepting who they are and they're like just like fully going into being witches and stuff, is I wonder if a big part of that is because their parents, their two aunts, are already there. And so by them kind of quote unquote coming out, like, they might ostracize the town who already hates them anyway.
Yeah.
But they won't ostracize their loved ones, like their two aunts. And that plays a big part into our ability to become into our full selves, is how risky it is in terms of, like, losing our loved ones or losing our relationship with them. And their aunts are already there. It's like if they were coming out as being gay and their aunts were just, like, gay already. Or active participants in, like in supporting the gay community.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
There's no risk there.
Nope. So the next thing that I want to direct attention to, as far as like working on acceptance and identity, because this is a big part of the work that I do with people, because I really like logotherapy that was created by Viktor Frankl. I talked about this frequently
all the time.
I really like the
but
concept.
It makes sense because it's good. Go ahead.
It's good. It is. It's good. I don't know why it got kind of faded.
Guys.
It's good. Like existential work. Like what I came out of school like really key on CBT. Went to the school I did because they key on CBT, and then like realized like a couple like I don't know weeks or months into internship that that's great for helping, but the existential reality of what people nearly need treatment is they need help with managing the symptoms, sure, but If you don't do the existential work, you're not doing the work. Anyway,
Yep.
is what one of the ways that this is like proven in this movie is that Sally is literally confronted with the man she wished for at the beginning of the movie.
And she pushes him away.
And she pushes him away because she cannot accept herself and her situation for what it is and where she is in her life, which is that she lost her husband and that she is a witch, and that is part of her identity, is part of who she is. As hard as she runs away from that, that is who she is and what she is. And until she can, like, she accepts that, and we go through the scene where they used their movie metaphors to show her letting go of the leaf, which was most certainly her husband and her attachment to that, to where she can accept this man into her life who is literally the man that she wished for, that he wished for her, and that we're not even going to talk about how he was in an active investigation with her and then like full on kissed her right on the mouth.
Listen, we're not even gonna... we're talking about magic and destiny and soulmates, y'all. We can't get mucked up in like like laws and stuff. Come on,
you're right. We're just
talking about romance, or we're talking about romance.
We're not going to talk about about that because the whole thing was about, despite how wrong it was, or despite how all of the stars aligned against them, that they finally were brought together.
He came there because he read her letter.
Right.
He had to meet her.
Bro. He just had to meet her.
He had to meet her.
But I do think you're right in that it is her using her identity as like a protective thing too.
It is
of like.
Absolutely.
It's like, you can't love me. Like, it's not real love. It's my magic or whatever.
Right. Well, it's not real love, or it's not this, but what, like, if we were to translate that into real life, people that have not reached a point of acceptance with themselves can be confronted with the perfect situation for them and still deny themselves access to it. And I just made somebody really uncomfortable.
Listen, I am a Sally. I'm not gonna argue with that. Okay? Would I also probably make 1,000 reasons why it wasn't real? Probably, okay? I already said I had a therapist this episode, okay?
So
that is true. Thank you for sharing.
I appreciate your authenticness there, Brittany.
Thank you. I'm working on my acceptance. Thank you.
Yes. But anyway, when you see that in people, you can, even as a therapist, be sitting across from a client and be sitting there and like, it is so obvious to me that every part of your being wants to make this change or that change, and you are not letting yourself grab it because you have not reconciled with your identity and accepted who you are or what you are, what meaning to you. Like,
I mean, and also
I see this all the time with clients where they're like, they just talk about one thing. I like have one client in mind that just talked about wanting to do one thing over and over, and like just kept talking about how that one thing was what that person really wanted to do, and what they were doing was never, ever, ever going to be anything close to that. And like working with that person till they got to the point where they could accept and realize that for themselves and do that is such an awesome moment in therapy, and seeing that happen is great. And I wish that, human beings had an easier time finding that, but that is actualization, is going through that and reaching a point where you can stop rejecting all of the things that make you who you are, even if it runs counter to what exists in your family, your society, where you live, and allow yourself to authentically be you and live your truth, is mental health. That is health. And we see it in this movie that everything changes for this family when they do that. They accept themselves, and then the community accepts them. And again, I know that is not always real, but the way this movie demonstrates its magic is by showing that is a reality that you can accept.
And I would say, too, with Sally's identity, as well as, like, her shifting identity from, like, Michael, her first husband's wife, to now being his widow, to now being, like, a single woman who might love someone else. And I wonder, too, if that's part of her being, like, it was just a spell, it's not real, like, go away. I would imagine, too, is, like, her trying to shift that identity and how weighted that is. Because there can be that complicated feeling of, am I portraying my spouse that died by moving on?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so it's also her having to accept that she can move forward.
Which I think is a really common thing that people who lose a partner experience.
Oh, yeah.
That term of letting go. And does that mean that I didn't really love them? Or does that mean that they weren't meant for me, or that I, like there's just so many different things that I feel like the different narrative that we hold on to that helps us feel like this identity is real when it really isn't. I feel like the amount of times I talk to clients about, what do you feel like is stopping you from believing that? Do you feel like you deserve this? Does it feel like this is the most important thing? Does it feel like there's no other option? Is that really what it feels like?
And I would say with her too, knowing that like her relationship with her first husband was also dictated by a spell, I think it probably would just scare the shit out of her.
Yeah, I was just about to bring that up, so I'm glad that we had a similar brainwave there, because I was like, can we talk just for a second? Like, I didn't want to blow up Hannah's, like, Hannah was obviously on a roll and making really impactful points. I was like, shut up, let Hannah finish, shut up.
Thank you for letting me.
Well, you were on a roll. You did a great job, and I didn't want to interrupt, because men interrupt women too much, and I'm trying to not do that.
Yes, and I appreciate it very much.
And I'm sorry for interrupting you earlier.
It's okay.
I'm also working on that.
It's a
very vulnerable episode for Owens.
But yeah, on the lighter note, like, can we talk about for just a second how the ants, ants cast a spell on her to counteract her spell to make her fall in love with this guy who is obviously good for her, but like, how fucking messed up can that make your brain when you go like, wait, was the greatest love of my life, like my deep love, was that all fake? Like, the amount of psychological trauma that would cause.
I mean, her face when they say that it was a spell, and she was
betrayal.
like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, when she's already deep in her grief.
Right.
And and
poor choice.
And the idea that they were like, we didn't think you would really love him.
They were just trying to like get momentum going for her.
They were trying to get her laid.
They were trying to open her up, literally and figuratively.
But that the fact that even they don't have hope.
Oh yeah,
that she could really love someone. I mean, like, to really, like, if you really dug around with that, I think it would be very hard to come back to that house in a lot of different ways once she finds that out. So I do feel like in real life it would be much more severe. Like, I don't know if she would have gone there, but what I do feel like she does is she does very clearly say to them, you will not be talking about this shit with my children.
Nope.
I bet
Good
you she has
boundaries.
I bet you she has to move back home because of resources.
Yeah.
And childcare.
Yeah.
And so it's like she's in a bind, but I bet you if she didn't have to, I wonder if she would have. Mm-hmm. And so because she's in a bind, she then to kind of like spit in their faces as much as she can.
I don't think that's her character.
Well, I think she's very angry with them. And I think she's like, we're not going to be doing all the shit I'm denying who you are because I'm angry with you for what you did to me. And I mean, we haven't gotten into this either. I know we got to wrap it up, but like it is curious, like how much these aunts and their own personal traumas in terms of they also had lovers, husbands possibly who died tragically, like how they might have constructed that narrative onto these girls too growing up. And so like there's just so much negative. As much as they were loving to them, they also seem like they talked pretty openly about this and maybe them doing the spell was them trying to like fix maybe what they've broken. Of like, we probably helped make Sally who she is.
Yeah, like she seems very scared and very like she's not going to open up if we don't do this. So it could have very much have come from a loving place, which is I feel like a really good example of, I mean, the aunts.
Yeah.
Could have come from a loving place, which I feel like when I have clients and we talk about their families and their parents and how there's a really good chance that they didn't know to do anything different.
Yeah.
And that it isn't because they are heinous, horrible people. Some people are, don't get me wrong. There are some parents, but a lot of times it's because they've had really severe trauma themselves.
Yeah.
And sometimes they might feel like it's coming from a loving place. And I wonder if that's the way the story or that's the way the movie, just because it made it easier, kind of didn't even go in that direction. But I do feel like if that betrayal I feel like she might have completed suicide.
Yeah. And I mean, and it also says a lot about like Jillian and her removal from the ants. Like, though it seems like it might just be her rejecting the identity that the ants represent, but also it could have been like, I'm so sick of living with these old biddies who all they talk about is how our husbands are going to die and how we're going to die alone and like yada, and it's just we're cursed and like I can't deal with these assholes anymore, and I need to get away from them. Yeah. So there could be a lot more toxicity in these relationships than we see.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's just another layer of generational trauma, another layer of identity, and all this kind of muckiness that is family systems, y'all.
Yeah. Yeah.
So with all that being said, we can slide into treatment. I don't know. I mean, we've kind of already talked about it a bit, but I think clearly like Sally would benefit from going to a therapist right after like her husband died. I wonder though if she would have entered therapy after Jillian kind of like gently visits her and confronts her.
That's what I was thinking.
Like you have to get your shit together. I think that would be the time where maybe like if she came to a therapist, you'd clearly do like bereavement, like based therapy with her, which is just like a lot of it's process. Like if you need like it can be a space where you can talk about how you're feeling without worrying about how you're impacting other people, because I think what's tricky about family grief is that even if you're sharing with other people that you love and trust within your family, if you're really honest about your grief, it can have really not detrimental, but it can have really negative effects on the people that you're talking to. Like she'd have to be mindful of how she talks about her grief around her kids. You know what I mean? Like other people who are like who loved Michael, who have their own feelings. Like grief can be really complicated, and sometimes why it's good to talk to a therapist is we're unbiased and so we don't know who this person is, so like you can be as honest about your grief as you need to be. And then also she clearly needs like some coping skills to help her with her day-to-day functioning. She'd be someone who I might have them keep a journal of how often they're eating. Like for some people I work with when they're really struggling, especially if they throw themselves into like being a mother or whatever, I'll be like, can you keep a journal every time you eat? I want you to write it down. Not because I want them to have any weird fixation on their eating or what they're eating. It's more like making sure that they're taking care of themselves. Because I've had people do that and then they realize they've gone whole days without eating and they didn't realize until they had to write it down for me.
Yeah.
And so she might be someone that because of her coming out of this pretty intense depressive episode, I might have her track like, how much are you sleeping? How much are you eating? How often are you showering? Just to kind of build up what we call like your seeds, your sleeping, eating, exercise, doctor's orders, self-care. Because if you don't got that, like you don't got anything. And so she might be someone that I'm making sure is taking care of herself in a real way, while on top of holding space for her to just like grieve and talk about her grief as openly as possible. So that'd be kind of where I'd hit it if I was going to do someone from this movie.
I think that for me, I'm going to go a different direction than I have typically gone, because obviously there's trauma here and we could talk about trauma therapy, although the perspective I'm going to take on this case is that the trauma processing that happens with this family is a normal reaction to an abnormal situation and is not necessarily representative of pathology, because what happened is objectively terrible to the family.
Yes.
And it goes on and on. So like, remembering that trauma processing is almost always from that point, and yes, it reaches a point where it's pathological. I'm going to go a different direction today. And I think that with either sister, honestly, what I would want to start working on with them is combining some of the aspects of mindfulness that work, and also some of Gestalt theory, which Gestalt has kind of fallen a bit to the wayside because it was essentially DBT, where you draw right? Is it not?
Fuck. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Is it not?
Yeah.
I mean, we talk about this. Dialectical behavior therapy is a really powerful therapy that is used to do both where you draw awareness to what's going on in the body and the process that's happening now, but also work on the thoughts that are going on and working on challenging those. And it's a really structured process, but it's really, and she'll tell you, the woman who created it, is that it's an amalgamation of many therapies of finding the things that are most impactful and work. And some of that spirit was created in the 50s and 60s with Gestalt therapy, which is a therapy that it's like so much based on understanding the process of what's happening now, what is going on now? What are you doing in your body? How is your body responding? How are you responding to the things you're thinking about now? And some of the tenets that need to happen with any trauma therapy is you have to pair a distressing stimulus with calm muscle body. And that does not happen without first drawing attention to what is going on in your body. And I'm thinking there was a video we watched in grad school. I don't know. Did you guys see the Gloria video?
Yeah.
If you guys haven't seen the Gloria video, you want to see some of the
Gloria tapes.
The Gloria tapes, seeing the old school theories that all of us have to learn about, and seeing the creators of that with Carl Rogers, Aaron Beck, and Fritz Perls, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So it's all three of those. So it's Aaron Beck is the creator of CBT, and Fritz Perls is the creator of Gestalt therapy, and then Carl Rogers is person-centered. But seeing the three of them go through three different things, I always found watching Perls uncomfortable.
Yeah.
With the Gestalt of what he was doing, but I thought that he was the most impactful, and Gloria liked him the least, but did point out that I felt like he created the most change in my mind. And while I didn't agree with he's kind of abrasive with her, but they're talking about something uncomfortable, and both of them are smoking, chain smoking, obscene amounts together.
Yeah,
but
insane.
But as he's talking about things with her, and I feel like in particular, Sally and Jilly would both need this, is he keeps drawing her attention back to, as she's talking about something, she's picking and tapping her foot and doing these things, and he keeps drawing her attention back and not going with the typical empathetic approach and going that sounds really hard for you, is going, what are you doing right now? Why are you doing that? And he's kind of an ass about it, but the importance of drawing someone's attention to how your body is responding can help people be more in tune with the way that your physiological systems are responding to the internal stressors. And I feel like, even though I disagree with the aggressive manner in which it was done, that doing so is a very important component of helping people get more in touch with what is going on within me, drawing their attention back to the internal, understanding that your body and all of your feelings and your emotions, like I go off on all the time, are biological impulses. They are not things to be ashamed of or ignored. They are biological impulses that exist to help you encode and learn from behavior. So if there are all those things, helping someone get back into their body so that they can register that feedback they're getting from this meat sack that we all have to operate in.
Gross.
Well, that's what it is.
I know.
But the thing that I would like for both of them to realize is to recognize how detached from being in their body and in their present experience they are, and how trapped in this generational trauma and the current traumas that they've both faced, and how reacting and responding to that and to the whole situation they've created with Jimmy, which we haven't even really talked about, which is weird because that's just even though that's not really the central conflict of the movie, it's a narrative device. But they are so much not in touch with what's going on, and I think that's why the ants leave and go nope, you're going to deal with this, and we are not going to rescue you from it.
It's called natural consequences.
Yep.
Which is a good parenting device.
It sure is. But also letting them sit in it and reconnect to their bodies and what their experience is now would help them to get to this point of acceptance and identity reconciling that we're talking about, because without getting yourself out of the reactionary mode where I don't know if people realize, but when you get your anterior cingulate cortex in your brain, when you start responding to that in your brain, you are no longer in your prefrontal lobe where you are being able to respond to rational thought and able to process space and time, and you are in a place in your mind where you are reacting to everything you are thinking of, every memory that you're interacting with in your brain. Everything is happening now. All the stimuli are happening now. It's not that this happened 10 years ago. It doesn't matter. It's happening now. And that is all they can respond to. So working with them on getting to a place where they can use mindfulness and cognitive skills to draw back to now, what's going on in my body, what do I need now, how do I regulate now, in the now as I think about this, so that I can regain the physiological processes in my brain that allow me to engage in an intelligent, meaningful, deliberate way to solve this problem, rather than be caught up in the chaos that is created by the moment. That is where I would want to go with them.
Yeah, that's great. Especially because I feel like we don't talk about that piece very, very often.
We do not. So I wanted to go a different direction today.
Yeah, I love it. So I was actually thinking, I mean, clearly I could do a bunch of family stuff, but what I was really thinking about, something that I feel like I don't talk about that much, and I feel like it's something that we all do, and it's such a big part of helping people self-actualize, is helping people understand boundaries. I feel like a part of being in a healthy family is having healthy boundaries. And what I mean by that is that you are allowed to keep some things to yourself. You don't have to share everything, and you also can't not share anything. Like, there's a balance of making sure that you are really connected to yourself and are aware of what is taking energy away from you and what is depleting you, and does that actually feel comfortable, or is it just a feeling that you've had so much that you can't delineate what it should be? So good boundaries are such an important part of really being able to put yourself first. And I feel like it's just something that I feel like we don't really talk about a lot on the podcast, and that how really important having healthy boundaries is. And when I work with people about boundaries, it's a lot of checking in about, well, what does that feel like when you share that? Or what did it feel like afterwards? Did you feel scared? Did you feel worried? Do you feel like you are saying yes to everything because you feel like you have to, and not because you actually want to? And that sense of, well, I just have to do it because that's what I should do, or that's what they're asking of me. And how important it is to have really healthy boundaries. So I feel like some of the reason why I'm bringing this up is because I feel like in some ways the boundaries that the aunts could have had better boundaries with the girls when they were little, in terms of bringing up things in appropriate way for the age that they were.
Yeah.
Not that they couldn't talk about their mother completing suicide and their father dying, but the way that they talked about it was not a healthy boundary. When we don't have healthy boundaries, we give too much information that overwhelms the people that we're sharing the information with, and they're not able to process it, and sometimes can even do more damage. Just not more damage, but just shift the narrative in a way that it doesn't need to be shifted, I guess, for lack of a better way to say it. So I feel like that would be an example of something that might have helped Jillian and Sally learn better how to to not be on such the extreme end of where their attachment was taking them. And then I also think about the boundaries with Jillian and Sally, and how they really only share, and maybe in some ways share too much, but I don't know if they actually share too much between each other. But I feel like them having this little encapsulation where it's just the two of them, and that they keep the world out in a very specific way, and that is an example of needing to open up a boundary a little bit more, in order to be vulnerable. That they both need to truly be vulnerable in order to feel more like themselves, in order to feel accepted, and all of those different parts. So I feel like that would be, and that another way that I kind of start with people talking about boundaries is just kind of checking in and seeing where you are. Like, what does that sense of like, what does it feel like when you do this? Like when you talk to your aunts, do you feel like, how old do you feel like you are? Like, do you feel like you have to listen to them, or you have to give them all of the information because you don't have another choice? Sometimes when we have unhealthy boundaries in families, it feels like the only way to have a relationship with someone is to give them all of your energy and to give them all of the information that they need. And that creates enmeshment. That creates a lot of different problems in terms of the relationship, where your identity becomes so wrapped up in them that you don't feel separate. And there can be a lot of chaos and a lot of confusion, a lot of pain in having that experience, and really feeling like there isn't another way to experience love, or to experience life just kind of in general. So boundary work is something that I feel like I do with every client that I have, because I feel like it's such a big part of really, again, that idea of putting yourself first, and that you are absolutely allowed to do that, and how that only models to others that I need to take care of myself. In order to do any of the things, I need to take care of myself first. And I feel like neither Jillian nor Sally really learned that.
Yeah, because like if it is like all their actions that they take is, ironically, it's for the same goal, is to play a role that makes us more attractive to the people around us.
Yeah.
But isn't ourselves.
Right.
So that's a good point.
Right,
yeah.
which is so interesting that the resolution of this movie and the whole writing of it exists to drive home that point again, that stop trying to fit into systems that you will never fit into. Accept each other with openness and love for who everyone is, and bring everyone's talents together so that we stop being a barrier in between ourselves and amongst ourselves, and that we can come together and rise and use our powers of individuality and the things that make us all together and overcome the threat of, in this particular situation, this supernatural asshole's bullshit.
No doubt.
In
Toxic
the subtext,
masculinity.
Right. in the subtext of women need to stop being caught up in men's bullshit and rise together with their own power to overcome the world, because if they actually do that and stop being distracted, that they could very easily take over the world.
Exactamundo. So with that, final thoughts. I think you probably know mine, which is that this is my favorite, one of my favorite all-time movies. I think I said that in like our introduction episode like 2.5 years ago.
Did you really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I said the exact thing I think I already said here, which is every girl who was, and guys too, I should not gender this movie, who was born between like, who basically came to puberty or pre-puberty in the 90s, is this movie is a big part of their lives. In Las Culturistas, another great podcast, they asked the question to every guest of what is the part of culture that told you culture is for you? My answer would be practical magic. It dictates a lot of how I currently live my life. Which is crazy.
That was a realization she had right now.
A little bit. I shouldn't use the word crazy. That's rude. But no, I think I love this movie. It's like the aesthetic. It's the cottagecore aesthetic that's very on TikTok right now. I just love it. I love the magic. I love the writings of Alice Hoffman. I love everything about it. I love witchy books and all that kind of shit. So I'm going to watch this movie probably multiple times a year until I leave this earthly plane. Hannah?
Yeah, I love practical magic. I've watched it a billion times. I saw it for the first time, I think, when I was 16 in the movie theater with, I think, girlfriends. And just remember, I fell in love with Sandra Bullock, number one, immediately. And I just loved everything about it. I loved the idea of, even though what we've talked about has been kind of heavy, like the idea of going somewhere where someone will take care of you, which says a lot more about me probably than it does about anything else. But I love this movie. I love Aidan Quinn's character. Ooh. I've never loved someone more. At that age,
real or imaginary?
Yes, exactly. Like everything about it. Every time I watch it, I'm just like, fuck.
I want to live
love him
inside
so
of it.
much. Yes. So I love this movie, and I'll probably watch it a billion times, and it still won't be enough times.
Benjamin?
So I will go here. Well, I obviously appreciated this movie, and I think it is a good movie. I think it's well done, and I think that it is, like, it has a great message. It wasn't for me. not
sure.
not that every movie needs to be for me, but this movie, I was not the target demographic that this movie is created for.
Yeah.
And I felt that way watching it, where I'm like, I mean, this is a good movie. I think it's good. I don't like it especially, but I appreciate what it's doing and understand what it's doing and why it's doing it, and think it's needed. I think that this is something I would want my daughter to watch when she's old enough.
Yay!
Wow.
That makes me so happy.
That makes me so happy.
Yeah.
I will say on your behalf, Ben, I do feel like this is the movie Hannah and I snuck in under your nose to do on this podcast.
For sure.
We came into it being very much like,
that.
I have no idea what Ben's going to think about this, because this is definitely us forcing him. You're like our brother that we forced to watch, like we forced to braid your hair or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep, I think that is very
because I don't
very
even
much
think
true.
we talked about this movie. I think Brittany said something about it and I just put it in the schedule. I don't think we talked about it at all, which we always discuss our options for our season, for our episodes.
And we're just like, we're doing this movie. Yeah, we're doing this movie. Yeah, of course.
I feel like you two had a dyadic moment of our triad here, where you subbed off and decided that we were doing this, which it's fine. It's fine. I know that this movie is very important to a lot of people. I had never seen it. I am so much more of a Hocus Pocus person, and would watch that one like 10,000 times because that's what I grew up watching.
Yeah, I hear that.
That makes sense.
I get
so,
it.
Every year that if I don't hear, the Bette Midler doing the I had put a spell on you. Oh, yeah, right. But if I don't hear you doing I put a spell on you, I hear any other version, I'm like, nope, that's trash. Need the right one. But this movie, like, it just didn't grab me. I didn't I felt okay watching it. It didn't take me away to like a place that movies take a lot of people, but I understand that it does for a lot of people, and I'm not in any mood gonna shit on it or say that it was a bad movie. I did not not like when Hannah and I went in on Heathers. Like,
true.
It's not going to be that energy. No. Which my wife asked me about. Like, how did you feel about this? Like, eh.
And I think what I appreciate that, Ben, is you just demonstrated for all those people out there on the internet, it's okay for you for something to not be for you, and you not particularly like it. And understand that it's still a good movie that other people appreciate.
Absolutely.
Right. I don't need a hot take on it. I don't have it. There isn't a hot take on it. My hot take on it is, holy fuck, was this movie 90s? So 90s. The haircuts.
You don't want to run to somebody while Faith Hill plays in the background and then kiss them in the middle of a town square?
Nope. Nope.
That's not how you met your wife?
That is not.
Wow.
Not. I just believe it or not. Like, it might have been how I met a girlfriend in the 90s, but not my wife. When I had a haircut, with the long hair and all that. Yep. By 98, probably still had that, but definitely still had that. But anyway, I think this movie is great and it sends a great message. And I think that I really would like my daughter to see it when she's old enough to help her understand. And I really hope that she watches it with my wife.
Adorable. I love that, and I love ending it on that. So you guys, you can find us at Facebook and Instagram, Popcorn Psychology. You can find us on Twitter at popcorn_psych. You can email us about how much you love practical magic at popcornpsychology@gmail.com. We will accept no other messages about practical magic. This will be the only time I take a stance like this. So like Ben said earlier, please rate us and review us on Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to it. Really does help our listenership. We get a lot of messages, like I think I've said before, on Instagram, Facebook, and we read everyone. We share them with each other. We really do hear you and read it and take it in. So we love it. So and keep enjoying spooky season, and we will see you later.